So I've done did it. I finally done did it. I actually fucking done did it. I listened through the entire Handmaiden's Tale audiobook. I'm not gonna watch the TV show. You have to put a fucking gun to my head. Um, I listened to it while I was at work, so it was a pretty passive thing. But it took several days. It was only 11 hours, and it took several days. I listened to like a 14-hour lecture series, like within 2 days, just because I couldn't get through how bad it was. But anyway, and I just really would not have had the perseverance to go through this if I had to read it physically with my own eyes. But I want to say why I did this. The two reasons why I forced myself to make it through this novel. One is that from a young age, I've always been interested in like dystopian novels. I don't know if it's dystopian or dystopian literature. And I would always like, when I first got the internet, I would be, okay, what are the most interesting dystopian novels? And I'd go top 10 dystopian novels, and it'd always be like number one and number two, 1984 and Brave New World. And then always a strange book, The Handmaid's Tale, would always pop up. And when I read about it, it was so bizarre. I thought it was fascinating. So when I was at a garage sale one time, I picked up, a little paper book back version of this from the 90s or something. This isn't like, when I was in middle school or something, like the 2000s. I was like, I'm going to read this someday. And I never got to it. And now I did get to it, and it was awful. But the second reason is that, you have all these memes online. And it's just coming forward and just in your face that this novel is what leftists see as some kind of prescient example, this predicted current events. In particular, I remember this certain leftist meme, which I actually was able to read in under the 3 hours, so that was unique for a leftist meme. But, I mean, it literally has this picture of George Orwell saying, "Did I call it or what?" Like sassy in this like snarky fashion. And then Margaret Atwood, who's the writer of this book, is like, "Hold my beer." And knowing vaguely what I did about the novel, and knowing that from my understanding, this is a really surrealist and bizarre novel, or that's what I thought when I read about it when I was a little kid. And I don't watch TV, like, so I was pretty much unaware until, like, people started protesting Pence or whatever in like 2016 that they made a TV adaptation. I was like, "Oh, that's gross looking." But I thought it was a wonderful opportunity to investigate the leftist delusion about the world. And the reason, if you look at like Orwell, the reason that he's prescient in 1984 is that he really examines this concept of semantic change and how a totalitarian state would use semantic change. This is like a linguistic concept, and that's where words become the opposite of what they mean in 1984 through state-enforced corruption of the original meanings, or just straight up through the strain of cognitive dissonance, which the state ideology has caused. And, the examination of cognitive dissonance in 1984 is very interesting. And that's where you get into the point of a dystopian novel, or a utopian novel, is that it's essentially a novel of ideas. The main characters, or any characters in it, are minimalistic, and that it's this book of ideas that examines how the world would work under these conditions, and it's really about exploring the system that this oppressive government has made, or the society has made. It's really about exploring systems, and it's kind of like political science or sociology. And when you look at A Handmaid's Tale, nothing is prescient there. And as the 12-year-old me thought when looking up this list of dystopian novels, it is a surrealist curiosity to a certain extent, but there's so little focus upon this system of dystopia that there's not really any point reading it beyond, if you wanted to read this for fun, beyond just reading the Wikipedia article, because that's not the focus of the book. Really, what's described in here is very seldom. The focus of the book is like a modern novel about adultery. Like, and there's this sometimes there's descriptions of a dystopian system to kind of, paint the strangeness of the adultery that's going on. But it's really a book about a woman that has several affairs. Like, it's not comparable to 1984 at all in content or in quality. But that's kind of jumping ahead. I want to explain why these absurdities in this novel exist, because it's a very absurd novel. The idea that, like, there's going to be this Christian revolution in America that's going to impose eugenic polygamy. That's very absurd. Polygamy is a very rare thing in the entire history of Christianity. And polygamy in America is a very highly hated thing. You have to remember Mormon polygamy, both originally and today, is one of the only religious practices which is explicitly banned by the government. Like, you can do anything you want religiously, but except for, I guess, human sacrifice, being a pedophile, and then finally polygamy, which being a pedophile and polygamy really usually is kind of the same thing. Something which Margaret Atwood doesn't pick up on here, which is bizarre. Anyway, the reason why the novel is so absurd is because people that engage in, deviant sexual sins defend them very vehemently. And they're essentially incapable of seeing any criticism of their sins from any other angle. They can't understand the criticism of the other people from a moral, religious, or even the basis of health as being valid. And any kind of criticism, no matter how minor, or I just don't want to see it, or I don't want to be around it, not even condemnation, just indifference. Because, being indifferent to homosexuality is the same thing as wanting the death sentence for homosexuals. So, any type of condemnation from their view is an act of violence. And, there's two explanations to this. So E. Michael Jones would say this is because they have this internalized guilt complex, kind of, and that they intrinsically, because of either Platonic or Aristotelian metaphysics, they know that it's wrong intrinsically. In a sense, they become so attached to their commies that it's the driving goal of their lives, and that condemning in any way, even to the point of indifference, invalidates their lives. So all moral codes, all political systems, and all religious creeds must adhere, not just adhere, but explicitly approve constantly their desire for commies. And any transgression against the right of the individual, again, and transgression is indifference, is equal to death. Another explanation, and keep in mind these aren't mutually exclusive explanations, is the psychological theory of splitting. And this is something that occurs in individuals usually that have either borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. Those two type of people are going to be pretty unchaste anyway. And I assume that these personality disorders in the system we've created are becoming higher and higher pluralities of the total population. But anyway, the disorder, or the thought pattern that's very destructive in splitting, is that they see everything in either black or white. They're incapable of understanding a positive or negative quality to anything. So, like Catholicism, when they look at Catholicism, these, borderline cummy people or feminists or homosexuals, they can't see the charity that the church does, or the importance that the church does in education or giving medical care just on a physical realm, or the spiritual help it's given, or how important that the church has been in establishing Western philosophy, or how much it helps people on an individual level through their own faith. In fact, they can only see it as this all-evil entity, like this black slime, that the one thing that they say, if it's one thing they disagree, is, say, the condemnation of homosexuality, that makes the entire system itself all evil in some kind of Manichaean sense. And so to these people, all forms of ideology, religion, moral systems, even ideas about health, because a lot of stuff talking about how homosexuality spreads diseases, and how, sexual diseases are coming from the homosexual community, and it's being spread outward, as we saw with HIV/AIDS, into the wider community through bisexuals. That's completely anathema to these people. Because even if you're doing it, you're just like, wear a condom when you're fucking a guy in the ass so you don't spread AIDS. That's an act of oppression, telling somebody to wear a condom. And this splitting, or E. Michael Jones's idea of internalized guilt, it creates this irrational fear that anybody who, let alone is indifferent or wants some kind of minor prohibition against them, like wearing a condom when you're fucking them in the ass, that these ideas, everything from indifference and telling them to wear a condom, all the way up into explicitly, ISIS shoving gays into meat grinders, is the exact same thing. They can't tell the difference because of the splitting psychological problem that these people have. So the focus of Handmaid's Tale and a lot of sex-positive feminism is cummies. This is why they'll connect, these bizarre things. Because there was, I think it was Russell Brand was talking to members of the Westboro Baptist Church, and he was like confused, like he couldn't understand that Westboro Baptist Church was like for racial equality. And in A Handmaid's Tale, the government of Gilead, which is supposed to be, this Christian fundamentalist cult, for some reason it's just white supremacist. It's never explained, because with their splitting, all the things that they oppose have to be held by their opponents, right? All the nasty things have to be held by their opponents. And this really becomes apparent if you read any college professor's literature about right-wing movements of any type, because looking upon what they oppose causes them pain, so they can't understand it. They can't understand Christianity. They can't understand, even neoconservatism, the most mild, in some ways, even left-wing. But they can't understand Marxist-Leninism. They can't understand classical liberalism, because any kind of condemnation of their commies, even if, implied or through indifference, causes them physical pain because of their, narcissism and borderline personality, because of this psychological trait of splitting. So when you go to the left-wing professors, when they write these histories of right-wing movements, or I've gone to them at college, and at the same because they have these seminars where they talk about the rise of the alt-right and the rise of the manosphere, and they don't call it manosphere, they call it incels, right? Or the hate watch groups, is when you look at what they're saying, they do not have any minimalistic grasp of what they're talking about. Because I remember this specifically when I went to college. This college professor said he did hours and hours of this research that was painful to him, of looking at white nationalist literature and websites and trying to read it and understand it. And then he would say, Jared Taylor is the most vehemently anti-Semitic person in world history. And he would say all these things that would be the opposite of all these characters, because this is in 2017, I believe, or 2016. All these characters in the alt-right, he would say bizarre things, right? Things that don't match. because these people, they can't understand right-wing or religious beliefs because the very act of looking upon them causes them pain. And that's why the world that Margaret Atwood describes is so off, so surreal, because she can't understand it, not because she, not even, you have to get to the point where she'd want to understand it, but she can't even get to that point because she can't even read about it or learn about it because it's painful to her. And really, when you go through the book, I said this before, you could take all the description, which is in the dystopian genre, this is the meat and potatoes of the book, is description of the world. You could take all the description in the world that she talks about, and it would fit onto 3 or 4 pages. In reality, you could, the Wikipedia page, if you copied and pasted everything of the book out that describes the setting, it would be as large as the Wikipedia page or the script that I wrote for this review. Because it's such a secondary concern to her, and even trying to understand it is painful to her, right? You know, you have breakdowns of these people where they put trigger warning and stuff, right? Trellian was talking about, he was talking to this girl, and he was talking to her about, like, basic classical liberal theory, and how, you know, these classical liberal reformers believed in, you know, normal nuclear family patriarchy, and the girl was, like, getting, like, physical pain from, like, even trying to process that somebody, this, you know, this classical liberal philosophers believed in, you know, normative stuff throughout all of history, you know, the father being the head of a household. So let's go back to Handmaid's Tale. It purports to be like this expose of the evangelical movement in America in the 1970s and 80s. Some scholars call this like the Fourth Great Awakening. And it's, if the Fourth Great Awakening, like, if you had a dictatorship of Billy Graham's, that's kind of what the book is about. In, you know, in the way that 1984 explores what a Stalinist Britain would be, or that Brave New World explores what a hedonistic utilitarian Britain would be like. The crushing problem here for Atwood is that she doesn't understand right-wing political movements, Christianity, or even really the United States. She's a Canadian. And she's a jingoistic Canadian multicultural liberal. If you read the book, there's this epilogue at the end where Canada is this utopia. 22nd century Canada, that is. Where white people are extinct, but I'm skipping ahead. The result of trying to be prophetic with ignorance is pretty laughable. I think that the key advantage of the right over the left, and this is what we really have to focus on, and I don't think we've exploited it, is that we don't get pain. I mean, I get some pain, you know, reading this book in that it's bad, but understanding the left wing, understanding how what the feminists believe, or understanding what the Marxist-Leninists believe, or understanding, you know, what the anti-racist people that believe that, like, there's metaphysical racism of white people, right? The metaphysical whiteness people. I can learn what these people believe, and just by learning it, it doesn't cause me pain. The right wing can understand the left wing, and the left wing can't understand the right wing. So I think it's very important to read a book like this, because in the end, if we're going to win, and we have to win because God is on our side, the reason that we are going to win is because we can understand them, and they literally cannot understand us. It is painful for them even to think about us. And that the reason I chose the novel other than the film, other than the obvious fact, film or television show, I really think that the idea of a difference between film and television is stupid. But the television show is that, first of all, the television show, it really would be more painful. It's going to be worse. it's going to be less intelligent. It's going to try and make more sense of her vision, try to systematize it more, and therefore water it down. And it's television and film is a palatable way for making high culture for the increasingly illiterate masses. We should really understand that if only 10% of Americans or 15% of Americans or something like that are reading one book per year, that our literacy is kind of irrelevant. So, even though it's a novel and it's not like a work of philosophy or something, the written word opposed to the visual medium of television is always going to be more direct and more, pure a way to understand and present someone's ideas. So if you really want to understand the worldview of radical feminism, which this novel is purporting, you need to read the book as opposed to watch this stupid TV show. Now, before getting into the narrative of the book, I would like to state this entire book is poorly written. The entire book is actually a tense error. And what do I mean by this? There are two distinct parts of the book. The first, which is about 90% or 80% of the book, is the actual narrative of the story. And then there's the second part, which is this meta historical analysis examining the narrative. And it's like a lecture, a college lecture made by, as I said before, the feminist Canadians of the future. In the future, the white race is extinct. Multiracial non-white Canada is a utopia, right? And now they're examining the historical artifact of the beginning of the 20th century, which is the narrative of the book. But in the epilogue, this is where the tense problems come in. In the epilogue, it says that the main body of the course is a diary. The problem with this, and makes the entire book a tense error, is that the book is written in first-person present tense, and it's often, not always, but often is presented as a stream of consciousness. By definition, a diary cannot be written in present tense, and it cannot be a stream of consciousness. That being said, writing in that way is extremely pretentious. It's the most pretentious type of novel writing, I think, is stream of consciousness. And this novel wants to be considered from the very point of it being written as, this work of higher art. So it is important for me to review it in that sense. It's not some stupid book. Even though it is stupid, it purports to be a higher level of higher art, which is giving me like a distilled form of the nightmare of the feminist world, everything that feminism opposes. So it is important I read it here. Other than its pretentiousness, writing something in a stream of consciousness is the absolute worst way to write the genre of dystopian fiction. As the very genre is predicated on the exploration of the functioning of a society, and something which requires a great deal of exposition. And that's kind of the focus of the entire genre, is exposition. Really, like, these books, like if you read any Philip K. Dick books, all his dystopias, there's a different one in every one, are the most interesting part about the book is his exposition describing the world and how it's different and how the people would act within this different world. But as I've said before, you have maybe 3 pages of description in a 200 to 300 page odd book. The description and description throughout this book isn't given, even when it's not describing the system or how the system works or how the people think, right? Even when it's not talking about the science fiction or speculative fiction here, it doesn't give description. It's very difficult to read because of that, because the stream of consciousness is jumping all over the place. Sometimes this book doesn't respect the fourth wall. Sometimes it's breaking the fourth wall. And the stream of consciousness is jumping back and forth between different times in flashbacks. And you cannot tell, especially if you're listening to an audiobook, as I did. I was listening to an audiobook. I'm assuming that if you read the physical book, there are the 3 dots, and there are larger spaces for paragraphs to give to the reader that it's changing relative time and it's going to a flashback. But even when it's going to the flashback, you can't tell what the flashback would be because it doesn't give this description of what's happening in the flashback, right? It's just stream of consciousness. There's very minimal description at any one point. So it'll go into a flashback and you won't know that it's in a flashback or that it's talking about the present or if it's talking about the future. And this is very, very terrible writing. Very difficult to read. But that is a horrible way to do that genre. And this is what I'm going to talk about at the end. The genre that she's written here is erotica, actually. There are various reasons you should understand that this book is an erotic novel. It is a novel about a woman that has multiple affairs. She describes these affairs in detail. And it's sold as a dystopian novel, right? But describing this dystopia, it's very underdescribed. It's very unimportant. And if you contrast this, and I always am going to want to contrast it with 1984, right? There's an affair in 1984, but it's a very unimportant thing. In fact, what the main character in 1984, Winston Smith, does, it's only important as he reveals more aspects of the society, and his description of it is a way to explore how this society functions. The draw of 1984 is learning about the society of Ingsoc that is created, Oceania, right? That is not the drive and the importance of the book here. This is not a dystopian novel. This is a modern, pretentious novel about a woman that goes through multiple affairs that maybe for editorial reasons was made into a dystopian novel. But now I'm going to finally describe this absurd dystopian. And as I've said multiple times, what I'm going to describe now probably is more than she actually, if you cut out each of the pages that there's description, my description is longer. I'm going to try and systemize and make sense of it because the descriptions that she gives in the book oftentimes are very up to the reader to decide. Her descriptions of everything that's going on are very up for interpretation. So I'm assuming if you've watched the television show, or even if you've read it yourself, or if you go read the Wikipedia article, what they're pulling out of her minimalistic descriptions of the Republic of Gilead is going to be really different from mine. So here is my description. I'm going to go through it chronologically here. So the book is written in the 1980s and depicts the aftermath of a violent revolution in a totalitarian state of the future, right? And this is the Republic of Gilead during the early 21st century. And this Republic of Gilead is formed by this secret cabal that originates in the American intelligence community. And the name of this secret cabal is the Sons of Jacob. And this cabal is eventually going to found a paramilitary force. And then they order this paramilitary force because they're in the intelligence community and they're able to kind of deceive the government, and they're able to deceive the military because of their high power in the intelligence community. What they do is they order the Sons of Jacob, its paramilitary force, massacres both the president and the members of Congress during a joint session of Congress. And this massacre, I'm sorry about that, is known as the President's Day Massacre. But the President's Day Massacre is actually a false flag attack, and it gets blamed upon Muslim fundamentalists. So, points to Atwood here for being prescient. I don't think they talk about her being prescient from like a 9/11 truther perspective. But so anyway, martial law is declared, and this is never explained, this part. Somehow the military is defunded and abolished during the martial law, and then the paramilitary force of the Sons of Jacob come to power. The Sons of Jacob then transform the United States into a white supremacist theocratic republic, the Republic of Gilead. And the vast majority of Americans during this transition to power and martial law are completely indifferent to a top-down, non-popular restructuring of the U.S. government. When the Sons of Jacob take power, they outlaw normal Christianity, and then various devout Christian believers, mostly in the Bible Belt, revolt against the government. And then a civil war begins between, the way that it's described, it sounds like Baptists. The rebels are simply called rebels, but we're made to believe that they're mostly Baptist, but they may also be Catholic. This is never explained. Very little of this is explained, as I've said numerous times. In the regions they have control of, the Republic of Gilead institutes, again, top-down with no popular support, a rigid caste system for women. And you have to keep in mind, when the narrative is written in this book, it's less than 10 years away from the revolution. So this highly regimented caste system and all these bizarre things that they're putting into place, this would have been created not through salami tactics or through, natural evolution, and it wasn't popular. It was top-down, created in a think tank, and just imposed upon society without that much backlash, from my understanding. So it seems that the Republic of Gilead's, its power base is actually what we'd call the traditional blue states, or culturally liberal areas of America, and that the Christian rebels are operating in the red states, like, I believe, the Bible Belt, or maybe even just the Republic of Gilead has minimalistic control of the center of the country, and it only has control of like the Northeast and like Chicago and Detroit and like urban Midwest or something, and like California. Again, the war is not described in any detail. It's a very passing thing that's only described in maybe one or two sentences. So the Republic of Gilead is recognized as legitimate government by at least Canada and Japan during the course of the film or the book. And in fact, Canada is like fiercely, like deeply approves the state, because Canada is very vehement in following the extradition treaty and expelling refugees, American refugees, back into the Republic of Gilead. And apparently some of the rebels, it's not explained if these are different rebels than the Christians in the Bible Belt, but there are black rebels within the urban Midwest, explicitly it says Detroit, which are being racially cleansed and forcibly expelled into North Dakota. The black rebels might be allied with the Christian rebels in the Bible Belt, or they might be independent of them. It's not explained. Almost nothing is explained. In the late 22nd century, then it's revealed that the white race has gone extinct due to mass infertility. That in this Canadian university, European history falls under Caucasian studies. Christianity is also extinct, and apparently Christianity has become so foreign that the professors in the future retroactively consider it an offshoot of Vishnuism. I'm not even kidding. So, like, Indian scholars of like Krishna and Vishnu, like they they're the ones that are the scholars of quote unquote ancient Christianity when it went extinct at the maximum of 200 years ago. And they're the scholars of it, and like Christianity is considered to be like a heretical form of Vishnuism. Anyway, Canada, despite whites being extinct, is now an advanced multicultural society, and it's the center of like the college campuses in the archaeological studies of the white race. The cause of this infertility is due to the accidental contamination of bioweapons. There's two explanations given in the book. Accidental contamination of bioweapons and nuclear fallout from failed reactors. It's a leftist book written in the 80s, so it's vehemently anti-nuclear, of course. In this caste system, I want to begin with the men first. She says one of the main inspirations for her is Iran, the Iranian Islamic Republic. So I assume there's only really 3 male castes, it seems like. First off, at the highest, you have the commanders, who I assume are supposed to be inspired by the priesthood of Iranian Shia Islam, and that they're supposed to be co-equal with like Shia, the higher aspects of Shia clergy in Iran. And these are the only caste which is allowed to have polygamy in the Republic of Gilead. They have multiple wives. And then under this caste, we have the angels, because the book is so non-descriptive. It's not apparent if the angels are combat troops or special forces troops, or maybe some kind of like elite paramilitary for the religion. And that, because it could also be that they're like Red Guards or something. They're like the elite, highly regimented religious followers of the commanders, and that the normal military still exists because there are non-military members. Like military police aren't part of the angels, at least. That's explicit in the book. But it's not explicit whether the angels are a paramilitary, all combat soldiers, or special forces soldiers. Anyway, they're the next caste, and they're the only ones that are allowed to have new marriages. And then under that, there's all other men. These men are only allowed to maintain their previous monogamous marriages that happened before the revolution. Now, the focus of this book is, if there's anything that's talked about for the Society of Gilead, it is the female caste system, right? And, I don't want to be explicitly misogynist here, but it's very, very obsessed with the way that women dress, right? She's very interested in, like, the way that the caste system dresses is oppressive. So maybe she does give a lot more description. I just am completely uninterested in the way that these women dress, because it's definitely more important to describe how each member of the caste dresses to Atwood than to describe the government function of the Republic of Gilead. Like, it's not explained if there's a president, or like the commanders are some kind of like religious college like cardinals, or there's one commander that's a high priest, or anything like that. Nothing like that is explained, but there is extreme detail about how all the clothes work for the female castes. And I, to tell you the truth, I don't give two flying fucks. That doesn't matter what they look like to me. So the first thing you have to understand is, like, divorcees in Gilead are like, that is like the worst thing you could be, is like a woman married. Not if it's a woman's first marriage, it's just as bad if it's a woman's second marriage. But divorce marriages aren't recognized. So like all women that are unmarried, or they're in a marriage that's either their second marriage or their husband's second marriage and beyond, they're turned into slaves. um, so that's cool. Only monogamous marriages are recognized, or only monogamous first marriages are recognized before the revolution. So that would mean that there's two different levels of of these existing monogamous marriages. The women that are married to the commanders, they're simply called wives at the highest caste. And then you would have eco wives or econo wives. And they're called econo wives because they're supposed to have all aspects of the polygamous wives rolled up into them, which that the commanders get to have. And then there's the virgins, which are the children of the commanders and either their wives or their breeders, which are the handmaidens. And these children, either adopted or through surrogate births, are then, because for some reason, like, it's got to have completely state-maintained arranged marriages. So the commander's daughters, that are called virgins, then marry the children, the angels, which could be, there's some type of soldier that's never specified. So other than these classes of free women, there's, three classes of free women: the wives, the econo wives, and virgins, unmarried virgins. All women that were before the revolution that are either in a marriage where one partner was divorced or single are rendered into slaves. And there are 4 castes of slaves, I believe. So I think, so first of all, one of the castes of slaves, there's state-run brothels, and the state-employed prostitutes are called Jezebels, these sex slaves. Then there's another caste of handmaidens, and that's what the book is obviously named after, but it would work just as well if you called them breeders. So they're state sex slave surrogate mothers, right? The commanders, right? Commanders are the only people that get to have multiple wives. They can have the breeder wives, and they can have these things called Marthas, which are essentially maids or house cleaners, and then their normal wives, which are their highest wife, by the way. And when they have sex with the breeders, right, the handmaids, it has to be done through some kind of cuckolding ritual, where the wife is cuckolded, and watches herself being cuckolded in this weird sort of way that it's incomprehensible how it's described in the book. But basically, the commanders cuckold their wives by having sex with the surrogate sex slaves, the handmaids. And of course, I just said there's Martha, which are domestic servants of the commanders. They're also slaves. And then there's an unnamed category of slaves that do manual labor. Older unmarried women that never got married, right, or even widows. Apparently widows are also turned into these slaves, these unnamed class of slaves. They become agricultural laborers, or they clean up environmentally degraded areas with their bare hands as a way to kill them. It's not explained why unmarried women or widows are turned into slaves. Keep in mind, widows are turned into slaves. Apparently, there was a caste of widows before the wives of commanders, but it's been abolished and they've been turned into slaves. This unnamed caste of state slaves who are agricultural workers or clean up environmentally degraded areas. Going back to the virgin caste again, and it's unclear if the virgins become full wives once they're married to the angels, because nothing is specified in this book. But their marriage ceremony is highly public, with numerous angels becoming married to virgins at the same time. It's very similar to the, the plural marriages that exist within, the marriage ceremony of the Mooney cult. Now we come to the discussion of the extreme implausibility of all this. But before, I want to reiterate this. To the Cathedral, if you want to use neo-reactionary terms, this book is a great work. It's not, it's not some work of pulp fiction. To the Cathedral and to, the elite circles, even if it's badly written or even it's surrealistic, it's not pulp literature. This is serious high art. It doesn't matter how shitty it is. You cannot find criticism of this book. This book is, they keep trying to force it on like high school students and teach it to them as like part of the Western canon. Like, this is a very important book to the Cathedral, and that's why I am reviewing it. So, getting back to describing the extreme implausibility here. First of all, caste systems are not imposed artificially from the top. Caste systems take hundreds of years to develop over the course of centuries in the civilizations that they exist in. And in the book, this caste system, which is very highly regimented, is socially engineered without popular support in less than 10 years. And the book doesn't state what the reasoning for the polygamy is. It's never stated. Description is completely unimportant. Specifics are completely unimportant. I am assuming that there's eugenic purposes other than having the rewarding the women that are fertile to the loyal, because that's just I would just assume it's implied, and it's done so to increase the birth rates, and that the fathers are the elite to society, because the system would in some ways resemble the system that some extreme eugenists want, where they want the high IQ men to be married to women and to have the polygamist women for them to breed their hereditary high IQ into the women and try to raise the high IQ of a society. This is some really extreme positive eugenics that some people believe in, right? But none of that is discussed in any detail, and it's not really either implied. I just am reading that into it. Again, no actions of the Gilead government are ever given any rationalization in the novel. And given that there are no rationalizations to the action of the Gilead government or the society they've constructed, their draconian laws are laughable. Their discrimination of women, I just describe it as a misogynistic grab bag. And it's this misogynistic grab bag of numerous elements of various ideologies which the author considers to be bad. And it's idiosyncratic because, why would, this is the most glaring one. Christians and Muslims want female literacy, especially Protestants. Both those religions stress the importance of universal literacy. Keep in mind, this grab bag might not be everything. I might not have picked up on all of it, because I might have missed stuff due to the difficult nature of reading the book. So here's the grab bag. Women are not allowed to read. They can lose their hand. They can be behanded for reading. Of course, the state-arranged marriages. Divorces are illegal. Previous divorces are the result of being previously divorced or married to a divorced person as well. Before the revolution, you were turned into a sex slave. Children of divorced women are then given up to adoption. They can't raise them. State-mandated sex slavery, state-mandated surrogate sex slavery, state-mandated brothels. Of course, this is kind of fetishistic, but all the women in the state-mandated brothels are educated women. They're all college professors and lawyers. So pretty fetishistic on Atwood's part there, right? Unmarried women are dissidents, and like you're just declared a dissident if you're unmarried and you're beyond menopause, right? And you're sent to a gulag. All makeup is banned. A lot of female basic hygiene products are banned, and I'm talking real basic stuff that has utilitarian purposes that men would like to use. Hand lotion and mirrors are banned, right? Extreme, like silly. State mandated dress based on state manufactured caste system. Women are not allowed to be employed in any form whatsoever. Women cannot hold money under their own name. Women cannot hold property. Women cannot go out in public except for in pairs of women. Women cannot testify in court except for as pairs. Women are tattooed. At least handmaidens are. I don't know if all the women slaves are tattooed, like Holocaust inmates. Struggle sessions. Women join these struggle sessions where they admit to being raped, and then they're forced to say that these rapes are their own fault. Fertility science is explicitly outlawed, and in the vestiges of fertility science that are still allowed, men are incapable of being infertile. That's part of the fertility science, or what remains of it. Men, there's no such thing as an infertile man. Women are renamed with the prefix of the husband's surname. Again, because this book doesn't give specifics, I don't know if all women are, or simply the handmaidens are named with a prefix of before the husband's surname. So like the main character, because the commander is Frederick, so her name is simply of Fred. She has no surname, no first name, nothing. She has one single name of Fred, and each of the handmaidens have a single name of as a prefix before their husband's surname. And then again, because this book is so unclear, handmaids at least are subject to monthly gynecologist checkups. I don't know if all women are subjected to it or simply handmaids, or all slave women again. So that's the misogynistic grab bag. Now, these are absurd for numerous reasons, right? It's very idiosyncratic. Some of these have never existed in any society ever. It's just picking stuff she thinks is suppressive that some societies believe. Like, why would you break up marriages? And like, what good would it do to break up a marriage of divorcees and then force them into a second marriage, like a polygamous marriage? That doesn't make any sense. What religion in the entire history of the world has ever opposed female literacy? Again, both the inspirations, Shia Islam and Protestant Christianity for the Gilead cult, they very supportive of universal literacy and female literacy. It's also worth stressing just how like purposely exaggerated the traditional female taking of her husband's surname is, with the entire name erased into a single name with simply of to imply ownership. Again, the men don't own the women, the state owns the women, because it actually is a cashless communist society, but I'll talk about some of the other stuff that she shoves in there. An important question of grave importance that is never asked is, why would the men want this system, right? It's said throughout the book that most people were indifferent why the system was created, and a small majority apparently oppose it. Again, no explanation why people didn't oppose it or were indifferent. No explanation. Why would the majority of men support a system of cuckoldry, which is going to force fertile women to be used as breeders by a small elite? Well, why would men want that? That doesn't make any sense. Why would men support a system in which they can only gain marriage as a reward for military service? Why would men want state-assigned wives? Again, like imposed in less than 10 years. Why would they want that rather than following traditional Anglo-Saxon pair bonding, right? And throughout history, polygamy is unpopular with the normal man. Like,
unless you live in a really violent society, and I guess this is a violent society because they're in a civil war, polygamy is going to result in a shortage of women. And polygamy is very much more advantageous for women, even if, like, you know, women supposedly are viewed as objects to be owned in a polygamous society. They essentially are going to end up with a lot more free time. And the book talks about that, is that, like, the polygamous wives have all this free time, but how oppressive it is because they can't read, right? They have all this free time as polygamous wives, right? They're going to have a lot of free time, and because they're only going to be married to high status men, especially in this system, no women are going to live in poverty. And the majority of men are going to be, a large minority at least, are going to be deprived of sex. So men gain nothing here, right? Only the commanders. Why would this be supported, or why would men be indifferent to this? Monogamous societies, of course, are more economically successful and far less violent than the polygamous societies. And keep in mind that she doesn't understand American history, because polygamy in American history has always been an extreme taboo. And to this day, it's an extreme taboo. Keep in mind all the different aspects of something like, you know, the crazy absurd stuff of Scientology and all this stuff that's legal within cults. But polygamy, even in, you know, not forced arranged marriages of underage women, which is practiced in these Mormon fundamentalist cults, polygamy across the board is illegal. It's just illegal. It's not protected by the First Amendment. It continues. It is one of the taboos which is strictly enforced. Like, homosexuals are allowed, but polygamy is disallowed in American society. And, you know, there's no religious asceticism to kind of, like, because she doesn't care about the system she's creating, right? She doesn't want to, you know, try and release the stress of a bottleneck of men not getting wives. So she doesn't give any religious asceticism for these unmarried men. And it's worth noting that incels and very misogynistic men prefer monogamy to polygamy. The extreme misogynist of the modern world consider polygamy to be the most oppressive and supportive of female rights that there could be, sexual rights, and that incels want, like, state mandated monogamy, not state mandated polygamy. And here we go into the religion itself. Gilead's religion doesn't have a name. It's never given a name. It's never given a name. That's how unimportant it is to the book. The religion, I will say this again because it's so astonishing, doesn't have a name. Again, the word Jesus, or the name Jesus of our Lord and Savior, you know, the center of Christianity, the word Jesus is never used in the book. So there's at one point where the characters visit a church, and because they use the word church, that's really the only reason why that you know that the state religion, the unnamed state religion of the Republic of Gilead, is supposed to be Christian rather than Jewish. Because there's no indication that this is, if anything, it seems much more Jewish, because they only quote the Old Testament and they never use the name of Jesus, than it would seem Christian, right? But this religion is created top down without popular support, cynically, by an elite cabal in the intelligence community. Again, talking about the implausibility of this, no religion created by a ruler or ruling party has ever become the dominant faith in any society. I know of 3 examples here. Yeah, I'm going to say this wrong. Din Ibi Ilalia in the Mughal Empire, only the emperor believed in it. It's extinct. The Cult of Reason in the First French Republic, extinct. And the Druze within the Fatimid Caliphate, and even in the course of the Druze, from my understanding, the initial religion that was created by the Caliph is drastically different from the modern Druze. So all these religions failed to be established as a state religion. And with Islamification, Christification in history, this was a process which took centuries. Like, you know, even in the age of Justinian, even into the 9th century, like, there are Greek polytheists publicly practicing their religion, right? Even in, like, the Justinian age, there are Egyptian polytheists publicly practicing their religion in Egypt. So, like, it takes a very long time for state-mandated religions to become the majority. I think it took 3 or 4 centuries for Muslims to become the majority in Egypt over the Coptic Church. The Coptic Church remained the majority for 3 or 4 centuries of Muslim rule. Now, it's important to note here, this is where we're going to go through this odd stuff that you just puts in there. Gilead is a cashless communist society. Most of the state power comes through control of its centrally planned economy. Paper money was actually abolished before they came to power, and they inherit the cashless society from the prior America. Again, cashless society is just established. She gives no rationale of why it exists. Blacks are persecuted. There's no given reason, and the only reason we can give to their persecution is because she would just assume that right-wing people want to eliminate blacks, I guess. And then lastly, there's these prayer machines which are run by the state. I have no idea why any Christians would want automated prayer machines. It's just there. Here's another one. Cities are surrounded by massive brick walls. On these massive brick walls, they hang dissidents out to physically rot. In, like, you know, earlier times, they would have put in somebody's head on a pole or something before a city. But it's not clear if Margaret Atwood is actually so ignorant to think that modern city walls that are made out of simple brick would work as like medieval fortifications would work. Like, it's unclear if they're there just for aesthetic value or if she actually thinks that they're there to protect the city. And keep in mind, these massive brick walls were built in less than 10 years. Like, everything that's socially constructed without popular support artificially by the state ideology, which is cynically believed by the holders of that ideology, is imposed in less than 10 years. Again, I need to reiterate that because it's so absurd. And the reason for this is the dystopian Handmaid's Tale. She's incapable of creating a world which is realistic because she's incapable of understanding her enemy. It causes her pain to even think about them. So that's why it's so laughable, absurd, and minimalistic. And that's because of psychological splitting. And that's why Gilead becomes this cartoonish villain with no reason, no explanation, no rationalization, because she's unable to examine or understand the motives of her enemies. And here's where I get to the crux of what the novel really is. It's not a dystopian novel. Handmaid's Tale is so stupid and underdeveloped in this fashion because it's an erotic novel. It's really a BDSM fantasy novel, similar to a gore novel. You know, gore, if you ever read the gore fantasy books, I've read the first 2. It's this S&M world where men are dominant and all women are men's sex slaves, basically, right? So this is actually probably more developed, and there's more put into the different types of sex slavery than gore. So in many ways, it's more like gore is like the Gorian novels, at least the early ones. I haven't read the later ones. Have very good like fantasy action in it. But this doesn't have any of that. Most of the book centers around the affairs, right? The main character of Fred has 3 affairs, and it centers around these 3 affairs over the course of the book. She takes no real other actions in any of these affairs. And you could really rename it, because one of the prominent fetish here is like the S&M like breeder fetish. And the book could easily be renamed into Breeder's Tale because that's really what it is. And it's also like this wish fulfillment fantasy for S&M because like these aren't rural Christians. These are like college professors, effeminate left-wing types because it's set on a college campus and very upscale like Cambridge, like Massachusetts. So it's like these effeminate left-wing men suddenly become alpha males who run machine guns and force all all bad girls into being their sex slaves. And you gotta wonder, did the editor force Atwood to take out this more sex from this book? Because I'm not a woman, but the lead up to the sex scenes themselves would seem sensual, right? Or it's described in a sensual matter, but some of the sex scene themselves are oblique and hard to follow and don't seem arousing. But keep in mind that the entire book is poorly written and it's hard to tell what's going on in the entire book. So maybe that doesn't even matter if they're not arousing because she might not be capable of writing something that's arousing. But there's so much. All the action in the book centers around affairs. Comparatively nothing is devoted to describing society, which is the entire point of a dystopian novel. It's really a novel about affairs. And that's the driving force behind the plot and everything in the entire book. And really, this book is simply a canonization by the cathedral of dissident female humorist fantasies of being subjected by their effeminate husbands.